Thanks again for joining me. It's Azure Chris here, and we're going to continue on our 10 steps to get started with Azure for Partners. Today we're talking about number 4. This is Azure Migrate. So up until now, we've been talking about how to prep your environment, right? We discussed permissioning with RBAC. We then discussed resource delegation with Azure Lighthouse. And for number 3, we talked about custom domains, right? And how to extend your customer's domain name into Azure. Now we're going to start thinking about where your customer is in their cloud journey, right? Are they looking to be born in the cloud? Are they looking to set up virtual machines from scratch or greenfield in Azure? Or do they have an existing environment someplace else? Maybe they have an old file server or Linux server someplace in a closet, and they don't want to do a hardware refresh. Maybe they have a bunch of data centers, colo facilities, and they want to do a data center migration project, right? Maybe they have some workloads in AWS or GCP, and they don't want to leverage those clouds anymore. They want to put them closer into the legacy environment or the enterprise environment, and they want to leverage Azure for that. That's where Azure Migrate comes in. Azure Migrate is a free tool that you can use from the Azure Portal that allows you to perform 3 major functions for your migration project. The first one would be discovery, right? What do you actually have in your environment, right? So in some cases, you could be talking to an enterprise and they have hundreds or thousands of virtual machines and servers, right? You'd need to use a tool to get a discovery and understand exactly what you're going to be looking to migrate. The second function would be the assessment, right? Out of your workloads that you have in an environment, what are they actually consuming? How much VRAM or vCPU or in physical servers, CPU or RAM, right? How much are they consuming? How much disk? What's the IOPS? The assessment will look at this information and then dial back home to Azure and generate a report for you to help you understand what the end state would look like if you move those workstations into Azure, right? What would those VMs be? Would they be an A class? Would they be a burstable machine? Or maybe something more robust like an upscale E class with a lot of memory on it? Maybe you're going to be leveraging premium SSD, right, storage in Azure. Now you understand, you have a better vision of what that end state is going to be, which was, it's better suited to give a report to your executives instead of, going on the Azure pricing estimator and doing something back of the napkin and giving that to your IT directors, right? The third function is the actual replication and the migration. So now that you have the assessment, the discovery all completed, you now want to move these workloads into Azure. Azure will leverage the recovery services vault and storage and take snapshots and migrate that stuff into the cloud, into Azure. So if you're a partner and you're looking to do just Azure, you can leverage Azure Migrate native tools. If you're a partner and you're looking to be cloud agnostic and move workloads in and out of different clouds, whether it's AWS and GCP, you can leverage Azure Migrate as kind of your portal or your single pane of glass, but you can also incorporate some of these third-party utilities such as Turbonomics and Corent out on the market. So really a lot of value here. We're going to jump back on the desktop. We're going to go a little bit over the theory some more, the documentation, and I'll just jump right into a demo. There's a lot to cover. So hey everybody, thanks for sticking with me. It's Azure Chris, and we're going to continue on the 10 steps to get started with Azure for Partners. And we're talking about number 4, Azure Migrate. So we're going to start on my blog page. This is a quick write-up that I put together here on my blog, azurechris.com. I have some documentation here that I think you'll find very useful. I've separated the links by the 3 different features or functions, right? The discovery, which is this link, the assessment, which is this link, and the migration or replication is this link. And it'll take you directly to Microsoft's documentation. You can run through the tutorials there. But I also gave you another link down here, which is Azure Learn, which I like. You guys know I'm a big fan of that. And this will walk you through kind of a scenario with doing a migration and give you some exposure hands-on if possible. But we're going to jump back to the documentation here on my blog page, and I'm going to start with the discovery here. So like I said, this is the tutorial, and depending on what your source is, you'll be working in that tutorial, right? So whether it's VMware, Hyper-V, physical servers, or AWS or GCP, you just click on that and run through that tutorial. They have them broke out into the 3 features, like I said, the 3 functions, and those links that I have on the blog page take you to each one of these functions respectively, right? So we'll start with VMware, and I don't want to go through over, detail, but I really just want to tell you, there's some prerequisites depending on what function you're at, whether it's discovery, assess, and migrate. There's different prereqs that you need to understand, and making sure you have a vCenter server and what version it is. Make sure you have port 443 open. If you don't have access to the hypervisor, if it's a physical server or in a different cloud, or like I said, it's a managed service, you'll have to treat them like a physical server and run through that tutorial. But this will walk you through the subscription, creating the access control, the permissionings around that, establishing the roles, creating the users on both the Azure side and the VMware side, right? And creating the project in Azure, as well as then setting up the appliance and running through the OVA. Now, I don't want to spend too much time in the documentation, kind of bore you. So let's just jump right into the VMware environment. So this is the VMware environment. This is vCenter Server. If you haven't seen it or haven't worked in it in a while, this is what it looks like now. I'm in the VMs and templates location here in vCenter, and I have a couple of virtual machines here. I have an AZ Ubuntu, I have an AZ 2012 R2, actually a couple of them, and a 2016. I did like an IIS server, a couple of SQL servers, and a Linux server. So really, what you want to do is you want to do the discovery first, right? And understand kind of what's in your environment. There could be a lot more machines, right? I said there could be hundreds of thousands of machines here. The first step is really getting the appliance into VMware, right? And this is my appliance here. This is the Azure Chris migration VM. That's what I called it here. And what it looks like is really going through Microsoft Azure and creating the project and generating a key, and I'll show you what that is, and then downloading it and importing it into vCenter. And once you import it, this is what it looks like. It's really just a Windows Server OS image, right? And once you get this image stood up in your environment, you'll have to give it an IP if you don't have DHCP enabled. For the assessment and discovery, you need to make sure that there's connectivity to vCenter. But when you get to the replication, you have to make sure that there's connectivity to the ESX host as well. So I had to do some troubleshooting on my end when I did my environment, so I want to extend that to you. If you have multiple VNets in VMware and not all of them communicate with the ESX host cluster, you'll have to put this appliance on that network or make it multi-homed or something like that. So once you have connectivity established, you can click on the link here on the desktop and run through it here. But I gave it an IP. I knew what the IP was. I know the port, and I'm going to do it from my vCenter console because it looks a little bit bigger, better and bigger than this virtual appliance. So it runs through the prereqs, with the connectivity and stuff. But I'll show you what it looks like when I connect through the vCenter server. So this is the appliance configuration manager. Like I said, it's going to run through the prereqs. It's going to set up connectivity to Azure. It's going to look at the time sync and make sure that's all set up to Azure. It's going to check to verify it's got the latest updates of the appliance. And then it's going to query the appliance to make sure that it has the VMware Virtual Disk Development Kit installed. And if you don't have that installed, you just go follow the instructions. Really, you're going to VMware's website, entering your credentials there, downloading a zip file, and then you're going to install that on the virtual appliance itself, not vCenter server, the actual appliance in the correct location, and then you rerun the prerequisites and you should get all green check marks there if you've done it correctly. Once you're done with that first step of the prereqs, you get to registering the actual appliance in Azure Migrate, and this talks about a key here, and the key is referenced, and I'm going to jump into the Azure Portal real quick and show you where to find that key. But the key is referenced when you create the project for discovery. It'll generate a key based on the name that you have, and then you plop that into this field. So we're here in Azure Migrate. If I were to say I want to assess and migrate servers, and then click on the discovery here, it will tell you based on what hypervisor I want. I select that, I say VMware vSphere, and then I were to name my appliance, and then it says generate a key. So once I do that, I'll generate this long key, I'll download the OVA and follow the instructions, and really that's what it's referencing when I get to that appliance, what that key is. So we're now back at the VMware vSphere. This is the key that I referenced. You plop that in there, you click on login, the Azure credential page will come up, the window, you put in your Azure credentials and you authenticate. Once you have the key in your credentials in there, you should authenticate to the appliance and it should be successful and you can view the details. The next step is step 3, and that's the credentials that you need to actually now get into the migration itself, right? So what is the name of your vCenter server, or what are the credentials that you're going to use in vCenter once you connect to it? And you can use administrator, or you can use, least permissions and create a new account that has the permissions exactly based off what the tutorial, the prereqs define for you. And you'll enter that in here and set that up. The next thing is providing the actual details around the vCenter server, which include the IP address, the port, things like that. And then you can discover your source and validate that. And it'll go out, like I said, and make sure you have connectivity to vCenter. Once you have that, we'll get to step 3, and that's providing deeper credentials into the actual workloads that you want to discover, assess, and migrate. So each one of those virtual machines or physical machines or AWS workloads is going to have an admin password, username and password. That's where you fill that in, and that allows you to get more granular and look at dependency mappings based on your workloads that you want to copy over. So if it's an IIS server talking to a database server, this will look at it. Azure Migrate will do that dependency mapping and look at those ports and what's actually communicated. So I put in the different admin credentials for my Windows VM and my Linux VM to perform this discovery. So I click on Start Discovery here. And once I do that, provided everything is set up correctly, I will now be able to complete my work here in this appliance and now just do the rest of my work in Azure Migrate. But before that, I'm going to jump into this just so we can look at this name. So I want to kind of look at these AZ Ubuntu, ATAZ, and we'll look at that in the Azure Portal. So now we're back here in the Azure Migrate tool and we're looking at their projects here. So normally you would have a bunch of zeros here starting the project, but because I've already run through this, I have some values. So I've just clicked on my Start Discovery in my appliance and I have 15 workloads here. So I'm going to click on this and see what is discovered. So we have multiple workloads, IP addresses, applications on workloads, dependencies, unknown because I haven't installed the agent and haven't granted it permissions and told it to look deep into those OSs and to get that. But you can install the agent, like I said, and perform that. It tells me how many cores, what's the RAM, the number of disks, the storage that's being consumed, the OS, right? So there's already a lot of value. Like I said, if you had a large environment and you had to discover all this stuff, hundreds, right? You can go and toggle through pages of your workloads. So that takes me to the next thing. What if I had so many workloads here and I wanted to kind of narrow the scope down? That's when you would create a group. So I can click on this, I can create a group and say, hey, let's just work on this workload, this one, and this one for now, and I'll create a group, and it would be based on the appliance that I saw. And I can have multiple appliances for different locations, right? But I've already done that, and I've already created a group. So now I want to create an assessment based on the group that I've just created. And I want this assessment to be based on Azure VMs, right? And I want to use the migration appliance that I've already imported and already registered. I want to call this assessment whatever I want to call it, test. And then I'll view all the parameters that I want to base this assessment on, right? So what do I want it to look like, or what region do I want this migration to be the target of, right? I'd say East US. The storage type, I want it to be automatic, or I could tell it to enforce a specific storage, but I want to do automatic based on the IOPS that it's seeing. Do I want to leverage reserved instances? Not for my demo, I don't, right? What VM series do I want to leverage? Maybe I want to leverage basic stuff, D series, maybe standard A's, whatever. I can drill it down and tell it to kind of, base its assessment off these classes for now, right? And you can drill down into the assessment and toggle all these levers here. And then once I have the assessment, it'll create it, it'll go out based on the discovery and pull back information. But I'm going to discard that because I've already created the assessment, and I'm going to show you what an assessment looks like here. So now that I have the group created, which was here, This is my group, Azure Chris. I can click on that, and this is what I've done through my migration, right? And this is my assessment. This is what it looks like. This is kind of what I've based it on, and I can go back and show you what it looks like if I toggle through here as well. It'll bring me through my assessment, and then it'll tell me the confidence rating here based on what appliance I used, what the region was. I can click on that and drill down, and now I see my assessment in my readiness chart, and it'll show me what workloads out of the 4 are ready for Azure, what is ready with conditions, and then it's already giving me pricing based on the compute and the storage and kind of what that is, and it breaks out the storage based on whether it's standard hard disk or standard SSD or premium. And right now I already have more value than if I were to do an RV Tools extract and then use the Azure pricing calculator and do a back of a napkin. I would just be kind of guessing at some of this stuff, you know, more of the art than the science. Now I actually have statistics and you know, data to back up what I found, and I can generate this report and give it to my executives, and now they can forecast what pricing is going to be based on, you know, the cost and all the analysis there. I can drill down into the assessment and look at the Azure Readiness. I can see this one with the condition is really because it's a Linux OS, and it's telling me, you know, for certain things around the OS, you know, some information, and kind of this is what this troubleshooting link provides. Based on conditions, you know, you'll find and you'll be aware of kind of what Azure Migrate is looking and what it sees there. And then it drills into this workload and gives you even more feedback, and, you know, and suggested Linux versions and updating the OS and things like that. So a ton of feedback here already. But I want to go back into the assessment, and we can drill down into the cost details as well. Like I said, based on the workload, how much it's going to cost, what the storage is going to be. So like I said, super valuable. So we've done the discovery, we've done the assessment, we've looked at warnings, we see everything. Now we want to do the replication to prepare for the migration. We now go down to the second table here, and we can click on replicate, right? So the replication will take you to a new wizard, because the replication portion of Azure Migrate is leveraging the Azure Resource Manager or the Resource Services Vault, and it has to instantiate that and create that kind of instance of it and all the storage associated with that as well. So I'm going to toggle VMware. I'm going to say the appliance that I've already deployed. I'm going to hit next. I'm going to tell it the virtual machines, yes, please use the migration settings that I configured for the assessment. I'm going to tell it the group that I want to assess, the assessment that I selected, and it's going to tell me already a machine that is there that hasn't been set up for replication. So I've replicated a couple already. This is one that's outstanding, and I can click on this. I can say, okay, let's replicate this one. I can click next, and now I can tell it what the target settings are going to be. I want it to be in this resource group, which is I've created for migration. I've created a network for that. And I'll take the defaults for the rest of the stuff. I don't need redundancy and things like that. I'll click next. And then now it's going to tell me, hey, what do you want for compute on the target side? This is what you have on the source side, but what do you want it to be? Do you want it to be this instance that you based your assessment on? Or do you want to override it and use a burstable or something? I can say, hey, you know what? Automatically use whatever Microsoft's AI thinks I should use, right? And let's go next there. And then we can do the same thing for disks. I can tell it, you know, override, or I can tell it to just stay with what I suggested. So I'm going to skip this and I'm going to discard it because I've already done the replication. And then I'm going to look at the replicating servers here and see what I have. So these are the servers that I've already migrated. And I clicked on it and it's showing me that it's already been migrated. Those are the migrated details here. But let me go back one step and you can see what's been migrated and what's actually still being replicated. So this is the Delta sync of this box, and it's still here in migration phase. Now I can click on this and I could say, let's test the migration, right? And make sure that it works correctly. Or I can just migrate if I am ready to go and I've already done all my checks, right? Or I can stop the replication if I feel that the cost is not, you know, where I want it to be and I don't want to migrate this workload. I can just cancel it. Like I said, I can click on this, get some more details here, never been performed. You can deep dive into that. I can stop the replication or I can migrate directly from here, right? And This is now that we've already replicated. I can walk through that same wizard that I had. I can tell it to just migrate. Like I said, there's a different locations that you can toggle into it. Depending on where you feel comfortable, you can kind of bounce in and out of these windows and just get kind of your overall of it. If you didn't have the virtual appliance or the OVA and you were using physical servers and agents, you would see the process server or the target server here in the infrastructure, and that would be listed, and then you can see kind of how scaled out your environment is and maybe kind of use this for troubleshooting, things like that, which are infrastructure servers. You can also look at the jobs for replication and migration, and you can look at the events that have been triggered. So really that's high level. This is the overview of the migration. Like I said, it's telling you what's migrated. You can see what's in progress, what's failed, test migration, things like that. Now that we've already migrated, I just wanted to show you what it looks like here. These are the virtual machines that have been migrated. You can see my AZ Ubuntu, you can see my AZ 2012, and they're in here. They're stopped, they're deallocated. I can turn these guys on. I could configure more services in them, make sure things are uninstalled if I haven't installed them, things like VMware tools that don't need to be there anymore. And, we can get them prepped for DNS and going live in my new IP space, right? So this is what it looks like in the Azure Portal. What if I also wanted to do database servers, right? We can go to this tab and I can look at database servers here. And I want to show you this real quick because I covered the database migration assessment tool and the database migration service tool. This is also from Azure Migrate. You can see how I've assessed the database, and it'll tell me AC SQL 02, kind of the service or the version of SQL that's on it, what the database is there, is it ready for Azure? Yes. Kind of what's around there, the name of the database that's been deployed on that box. It'll tell me that it's ready for an Azure SQL database or an Azure SQL VM, and it'll give me specs around that. And the way I determine that is by installing software on the virtual machine. So let's jump back into VMware real quick, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we're back in the VMware environment. We have my servers here, and I'm going to pop this one open. Now this is my SQL database server. It has the AdventureWorks sample database from Microsoft site. I installed it. This is the SQL Server Management Studio. I have my tables, my database, all that stuff configured. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and installed the Assessment Database Migration Assistant tool on it. And I've already run through an assessment. So I did, load, and I'm going to open the assessment here. And you can see what it's done and kind of what work it's already here. There are no feature parity issues, and then I could click on compatibility issues, and now it's gone through the database and the server, and it's done some work to tell me what's out of compatibility, what has been, what is not supported in Azure SQL DB or Azure SQL Managed Instance, things like that. So I can prep my database and understand that when I do this migration, I can then, be prepared for this workload shift. Once I do the assessment, I can click Upload to Azure Migrate, and that's where you'll see kind of that button in the Azure Migrate that I just showed you with the one SQL server. It got that information from here when I click the Upload Migrate. The next step would then be to leverage the database migration service. If you had a larger database, you can do things offline or online, depending on what that is. Like I said, I'll try to do another lab, give you some documentation. If you guys have any questions around that, feel free to reach out to me. I wanted to make this high level and not get too into the details. If you have any questions, concerns, like I said, reach out to me, click like, click subscribe. And hopefully we can drive some more Azure consumption, and let me know what you think. The next one on my blog is going to be number 5. It's going to be VPN with Azure Virtual WAN and VPN site to site, still kind of on the lines of setting up your customer and doing hybrid IT. So hopefully you guys found this beneficial. Let me know what you think, and hope to talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.